Okay, third grade, you've got your henna hands, so we're ready for step 2. You've finished creating your two hands, your right hand and your left hand, full of the beautiful, intricate henna patterning. Hopefully you found a cool way of hiding your name within your design. Like I've got mine right here. I've got my A-T-K-I-N-S hidden within my design. And now I've got to think about what I'm going to put these on. Hopefully you've got some paper large enough that you can fit, both of your hands onto that paper. But if you don't, you could always do 2 different papers where you have, one hand on one sheet of paper and one hand on another sheet. You just do that however you need to. Now I could take my hands and I could just kind of put them on the paper like this. And that would be fine. That wouldn't be, there's nothing wrong with putting them like this. But there's a couple kind of funny things, if you will. Like, first of all, they're floating. There's no arms. So that's just a little awkward. And second of all, it's just, well, there's nothing wrong with this composition. It's kind of boring. So I want to think a little bit before putting my hands down about how I can put my hands on this paper in perhaps a more interesting way. I'm using the edge of my paper here to line this hand up. And then I could maybe pull this one, over here. And that's a far more interesting use of my space. I could also play with pulling this hand down here and maybe moving this hand up here and turning it this way. If your hands overlap a little bit, that's fine. That's not a problem, but you don't want them to overlap like a whole bunch. If they have to overlap a whole bunch to fit, go ahead and just plan on using 2 sheets of paper. All right, now art students, the other thing we have to think about is these hands on this paper right now are not super exciting because there's not a lot of contrast. The paper from the hands was white. I've got the black design on them, but then all this white paper isn't doing a whole lot to pop this design. So I need to add color to this paper. Now I could do that by just using construction paper, or I could just color this paper in. But again, that's just not super exciting. So I'm thinking that a cooler way of treating this paper might be to search within your henna for some designs that you find particularly interesting, so that when you design this background, you're using some of that, like the shape and pattern and the line, the repetition to design that background. Now, if I did a whole bunch of teeny tiny little designs all in this paper, that's going to make it hard for my eyes to have a place to rest because it would just be too much design. It would be too many things all over the place. So instead, I think a cooler way of going at it is to choose some of your henna to really enlarge within that space. So if you look at this one of mine right here, on this side, I've got this repeating kind of teardrop shape. And for some reason, I just always really like that shape. I've got them on the fingers here as well. And I used them kind of on the end of my S's as well. And I probably used them somewhere in this design. Maybe not. But I just really like that shape. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose that shape, and I'm going to choose maybe one of my lines to then design the background of this paper, really making those shapes much, much bigger so that it becomes more about the color in the background rather than about the line and the shape. So our hands really focus on using those elements of art of line and shape. And the background will use them, but that won't be the focus. The focus is going to be on that color so that the hands really pop against the background of what we're going to eventually put them on. Now, before I get into creating mine, I'll just tell you what I'm going to use. This is watercolor paper, so it can handle wet media. If you're working on like computer paper, it really can't handle wet media. So color pencils or markers or crayons are going to be your better bet. I just have this set of markers here that I'm going to use because they work really well with the technique that I'm going to do. And if you're working with a thicker paper, you could certainly try something like this. But if you aren't, or if you don't want to, just any kind of colorful media will work for you. So I'm going to move my henna hands off to the side, and I'm going to first just start with a pencil. And I'm going to design this space a little bit. So like I said, I'm not going to make my shapes really small. I'm going to make them fairly sizable at this point. So Like there's that kind of teardrop shape. I'm not drawing real dark in case I want to make changes. And I don't have to necessarily do them in the same patterning as henna. I could if I wanted to, but I think I'm just going to do alternating teardrop shapes that are going to change in size going across this paper, some larger, some smaller, and eventually they're going to start running right off of the paper, and that's fine too. So you're going to finish designing the space of your paper. Let's see, I'm going to add these teardrop shapes in here as well. And let's see, did I do those facing? I might have done those upside down. I think I did. But that's okay. It'll work. So and then I guess on this side, I'll make them facing the other way. So it's like on half of it, it's facing one way, and on half of it, it's going to be facing a different way. Now, the way I'm going to choose to finish mine out, like I said, I could just color it. Then that would be a perfectly fantastic way of handling this. But I really like doing this little trick. If you don't have watercolors at home, I mean, you could paint this too if you've got paper that you could paint on. But if you don't have paint at home, you can create it out of markers. And the way you do that is just, as long as test it on another sheet of paper and make sure some markers work better than other markers. These markers that I'm working with just happen to work really, really well for this technique. They're just Crayola brand, but they're shaped like a brush on the end of it. So I'm just kind of outlining this shape with a pretty bold outline. And then I can come in with a paintbrush and just clean water, and I can grab the pigment, and because it's a washable marker, it's water soluble, and it'll grab that pigment and spread it to the inside of this shape that I'm working with. And I'm trying not to go outside of my shape. I'm just sticking within it, and I'm grabbing that marker pigment and pulling it into the middle. I'm just sort of spreading it and acting as like it's paint, and it kind of creates that, I don't know if you guys remember back from the beginning of the year when we studied all our watercolor techniques, and one of the things we studied was a graded wash. It kind of creates that graded wash where it starts off darker and then it gets lighter towards the middle, which is a pretty neat technique. All right, so art students, I'm going to go ahead and finish this out. One thing that I really have to pay attention to, if you remember from watercolors, is that they'll bleed if you put wet next to wet. So I may not want to like work to the outside of this right now. I'm just going to work on all my shapes. I'll let them dry, and then I'll come back and do the space in between the shapes so that none of my colors bleed. You can, if you want to, blend colors with this technique. So I'll show you that real quick before I switch over to doing this in a faster format for you. So I can use these colors. I'm going to grab a different paintbrush too. I'm not loving that one. Let me switch over. I think this is going to be a better paintbrush for me. I'm outlining this shape here with this kind of medium blue towards the top. But then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to switch over towards the bottom of this shape. I'm going to outline it in this darker blue. And then when I pull that pigment in, just like before with the other color, it'll blend those two colors together, which is really neat. All right, so I'm starting off with just the lighter of the two colors, pulling that really beautiful blue pigment color in. And when I get down here, it switches to that darker blue because that's what I use down on the bottom. And as I draw that darker blue up, grab a little bit more clean water, and the lighter blue down, they'll mix together in the middle, which is a pretty neat thing to do with this. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and switch it over to doing a time lapse to finish this out so that you don't have to watch me color in real time. And then I'll finish showing you what to do with your hands. this is the last step of this. I finished filling in all of my colors. And one thing I'll say that I didn't say before I was working, if you do use this method and you choose to do some color blends, remember that colors that are next to each other on the color wheel or next to each other in rainbow order, those blend well. Colors that are across from each other on the color wheel don't blend well. I mean, they physically will blend just fine, but they turn into kind of muddy, like just not super nice colors. So if you want like really vibrant, colorful work, then sticking with those colors that are next to each other in the rainbow, next to each other on the color wheel, they're called analogous, is the art term for it. They're gonna do better blends for you. All right, you might notice right here, I put this outside to dry and I put like a little something on the corner to weight it down, and it must have been wet because it dragged some of this pigment in here. But fortunately, I'm gonna end up gluing my hands down so I can cover that up if I want to in some way, or I could embrace it and make it a beautiful oops in some way. I could try painting this again and just see what happens, but just due to time, I'm gonna go ahead and just cover it with my hands. So again, I should have, and if you haven't, you can do it now, come up with kind of an interesting way of putting your hands onto this paper so that they're not just two like kind of weird floating hands that don't have, you know, arms. Come up with a way of putting them onto the paper so that they're running or, you know, sticking into the space in a way that you're, you know, happy with how they're displayed, and then you're going to be getting them glued down. But can you see what a difference this is between like when I put them on the white paper and now having this really colorful background? What a nice job that does with highlighting these hands. You can use white glue, you can use glue stick. If you're using, if I can get my glue stick open, if you're using a glue stick, just make sure you pay attention to, well, I guess this is white glue too, but make sure you pay attention to getting all the way to your edges. If you're using liquid glue, like the white Elmer's glue or school glue, whatever brand you might have, Target, Walmart, whatever, don't get too much glue because, you know, it squishes out the sides and just kind of puddles and gets kind of icky. So I'm gonna get this hand glued down here, and because I'm, ooh, look, see, I got some on there. I think, oh, I had a little puddle here on my table, so that got a little bit of color onto my hands. You may just want to check your workspace. I'm going to take the time to actually like really press this hand down and count to about 20 in my head to make sure that I get it really well stuck down. And then any part that's still wanting to pop up, I might just add a little bit more glue. Like this finger right here is starting to want to pop up, and I'm actually gonna, well, no, I'm not. Okay. I was gonna try to paint away that kind of pink marker that got on there, but I think I better not. I think that might just make it worse. All right, so I've got that finger really well glued down. I'm gonna come over here and do the same thing with the other hand. Getting my glue applied to the back of this hand. And a little bit more on the thumb. Get it glued down so that it's kind of covering up that little paint splotch. And I'm paying attention to like doing a nice job of lining it up with the edge of my paper so that it's not like just kind of weirdly crooked. Getting it glued down, same thing, counting to about 20 in my head. Really, really, really good gluing. Holding it down. Everything seems to be sticking okay. I don't think I need to re-glue anything on that one. And then my last step is, of course, as an artist, I need to sign my work. So I just have to decide, like, do I want my paper like this? Do I want to orient it, you know, like this? So it's, you know, just decide which way you want your work to be oriented. I kind of like this. All right, so I think I'm going to have mine oriented like this, and I'm going to sign down here in this bottom corner because I think this is just a nice place to sign. It'll be visible without being like stealing focus or anything. So I'm just going to come over here. Let's see. Well, let's see. There we go. Okay. And like I've told you guys, I like to sign with just my initials, but you could sign your name. Some of you have come up with some pretty cool ways of writing your name to do your signatures. You choose. I just do my initials, CA, and I think that's backwards because I'm using the camera flipped, but I assure you I did not write it backwards. That would require some talent that I don't have. So I actually wrote it forwards. And that is the end of the Henna Hands project. If you guys would take a picture and send them to me, I'd really like to see these. This is one of our main units that we would have done in school. And I think it's a really, really neat unit. And also, like I was saying to you guys, if you know things about henna that I didn't say, I'd love to hear it. All right, art students, I can't wait to see them.